Man, I've just hit record. I was just about to jump in and tell you, yeah, you're a seasoned campaigner. I noticed your name's been jumping around a lot of running podcasts, a lot of physio podcasts. I was having a flick through the Running Strength podcast the other day just to see who he had on his show, and I saw your name pop up. You've been a busy man. It's becoming less of a surprise to me now. You're becoming more and more international is the appearance that I can take away from what I'm seeing.
It's the end product of, or like the journey product of doing what you love. And just, I love talking about running, love getting on as many running podcasts as possible. It's just like, yeah, I'm on a mission to try and get as much useful information to the runners as possible. And so podcasts are a great way to do it. So I find myself on many podcasts, and I'm very happy that like a lot of hosts of podcasts are happy to have me on. And so pretty thankful in that regard.
It's hard to argue with you now as well, because you've been on so many and because you actually really know what you're talking about. It's like, it'd be silly because so many podcast guests, as you know, or podcast hosts, it's nice when someone, reaches out to you, or when you can look at someoe's background and go, oh, hang on a second, this person's legitimate. Like they're going to offer something really nice. And that's why I was keen to get you back on here, not only because I enjoy catching up, having a chat with you, but because I always leave the conversations with just a little bit richer knowledge. And I was saying to you before I hit record, like I've been in the scene now for 20 years, but the idea of, a lot of what you talk about, running strength, running recovery, everything sort of, just, what do you say? Just building a foundation to be able to launch a stronger running component off is still something that even after 20 years, I'm wrapping my head around. So I can only imagine that a lot of the people who listen to this show, who are maybe a little newer to the sport, would appreciate that possibly even more than I do. But the funny thing is, when I messaged you, I kept it fairly open the other day about what we talk about, because I knew there was 27 different things we could potentially chat about. So I love, for those of you listening, I sent Brodie a message and said, mate, let's just keep it pretty loose. He's like, how about we focus on one of these particular topics that I've spoken about more directly? And I looked through some, I was like, that's such a better idea.
When you're having the idea of like, how about we just talk about what I've been up to for the past year, or like what some new insights I have. I don't really like talking about me too much. No one really wants to hear about me. More people just want to hear about running.
I must be an outlier then, because I was really interested. Before we do, just offer me a little bit. We were just talking about the book, the ebook that you've put together from the Run Smarter podcast. What was a repurposing of just some, I'm going to say, profound insights from your guests, only because I've made an appearance in the book. I want to up it up even more. But hey, tell us a little bit about that. And is it for sale? Is it a free download? Where are people finding it?
I am constantly working on like business ideas and constantly trying to find new avenues to repurpose content, but also just getting more information just to runners. And so I actually did part one of my ebook was 10 chapters on how to reduce your risk of injury, or what you need to know about injury prevention. And I did that years ago, and the 10 chapters of those of that topic became the first 10 episodes of the Run Smarter podcast. And so kind of released the podcast and the ebook both at the same time. And then I went through the first 100 episodes of my podcast, and I thought, let me try and repurpose, or how should I repurpose a lot of these like episodes? And so I decided to create, I guess, volume 2, part 2 of an ebook, which follows the same kind of storyline, but then again has 10 more chapters, not how to reduce your risk of injury, but how to increase your running performance safely. And so again, 10 chapters, it covers 10 principles. And that's sort of got me thinking like maybe I should come up with a more substantial book, maybe with a part 3, because not only do runners want to reduce their risk of injury, it's like what the number one thing that a lot of runners want to learn about. They want to increase their running performance. They want to do it safely. So that's why I've done part 2. But I really enjoyed talking about pain science, and like having runners understand the biopsychosocial factors around pain. I find it really interesting. And I think a lot of runners really need to, it's something that you need to learn. And I thought that would be a nice part 3, talking about chronic pain, talking about like if you just have if you're trying to manage the injury in general, what you need to know about pain. And so I've put together a template, kind of like a skeleton of all those three parts. And I'm currently dedicating a lot of my time to put together like a pretty substantial book and start putting that together, which I have no idea how long that will take, because I say to myself, all right, this is my to-do list. And once I get through this to-do list, then I'm finished with the book. But the more I start writing, the more I start plugging away at this to-do list, I get more ideas. And so the more I write, the more ideas I have. And so my to-do list is constantly growing rather than depleting. So when it gets done, who knows?
Are you talking about your to-do list for the chapters of the book, or just your to-do list for life in general is continually going
to do with the
write?
book.
Yeah.
It's all like I want to have quotes from the podcast. I want to have my own insights. I want to have like clients that I've worked with, some really nice examples. I want to have like the literature. I really like pointing to certain parts of like papers that have been released, just so it's not just me talking about my opinions, it's actually pointing to some evidence and saying this is why we should sort of follow these trends or follow this bit of information. And so it's constantly just new ideas, new papers come out, new like examples of injuries. And I'm just, yeah, it's ever growing.
I love it, man. So many of my good friends are like that. I think it's one thing I admire in people, maybe because it's something that I like about myself. It's just that little hustle. I love people who have just they've got a mission, and they just got their head down and they're going for it. And that was part of the reason I wanted to get you back on as well, because I know you're going for it. You're starting to make some big dents. So it's exciting, man. It's cool to be able to, not only pick your brain, but always leave these chats a little inspired for myself. So good for the audience and also good for selfish reasons. But mate, today we boiled it down from. I wish I could show people your Instagram message on what we could potentially talk about, because there was no shortage of options. Maybe a suggestion you and I could do 15 more episodes, but we boiled it down to off-season training. And it's interesting, the idea of off-season I'm familiar with, because I used to divide my seasons between obviously track season, which was my bigger focus, and then cross-country season, which was really important in the foundation of what I was trying to build for track. But it was also, it had its competitive elements of its own that I was really keen to improve. But a lot of people, when we're talking about on and off season, they might not be super familiar with what we mean, because they don't have a designated like, all right, I'm a track runner, I'm a cross country runner, because road and cross country pretty much run all through the year. So just as a bit of a foundation, I thought I might get you to define what we're actually talking about when we say off season. What does it look like? And then we can sort of just start delving into some of the tips, some of the ideas that we have for making sure we get the most out of that particular phase of our training year.
Yeah, cool. And most of the runners I work with are just recreational runners. They're not like seasoned collegiate kind of athletes, or they don't follow any structured particular season. So they might not even have an off season, but it's worth knowing that if you do have goals in mind, if you do have marathons to do sort of planned throughout the year, it's good that you can establish these sort of phases and see if an off season is right for you. Because a lot of runners, well, some runners, they get burnt out a little bit if once they have a goal race and they achieve a marathon or a half marathon or an ultra, like they can get a little bit burnt out afterwards, and then they might need a little bit of that off season, a bit more downtime to settle, rethink, regather, and then wait for those motivation levels to boost back up before start competing in another race or have another goal set forth in 6 months, 12 months time. So I guess it's open to interpretation. I know it's a little bit more structured, regimented for those who are track athletes or like cross-country runners who do have a dedicated season with their team or with themselves. But if you just are a recreational runner who loves running, which are the bulk of runners that I work with, you don't have to have an off season, but sometimes if you find yourself getting burnt out or wanting to train a bit more regimented, wanting to have a bit more of a peak phase and then push out the best performance possible and then have a bit of a recovery session in a particular time of the year, then that's usually what I would count as an off season. I don't know if you have a different take. I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Man, no, I'm really interested in it because I agree with everything you said. One of the things that I definitely toyed with when I was competitive in the running scene was how to treat that off-season period. So for me, I always like to just maintain some element of running training as I went through that first couple of weeks of off-season. I toyed with taking 2 weeks completely off running. So the last track race of the season would finish. And then I think there was 2 years where I said, okay, if I feel like running, I can run. If I want to have a couple of weeks off completely, I have a couple of weeks off. And I remember the first year I had that 2 weeks completely off. And I remember feeling as though I'd had just such an insane amount of time off running when I got back into it, that it felt like I just felt so sluggish for about a week, that it was just, I didn't really enjoy even if there were physical benefits to it, I didn't really enjoy the mental side of that sluggishness. So as the seasons went on, the next year I might have had that week off and then introduced like some lighter running. And then I think that were the only 2 years I had completely off. And then from there, it would just be like, all right, well, official training has finished. So it was like, all right, you might just go for a 15-minute run just to turn the legs over. And even that, like running between sort of 15 and 30 minutes a day, back when I was running 160K a week, like it sounds to new runners, 15 or 30 minutes a day might still be a challenge. But in comparison to what I had been doing, it was almost nothing. But that almost nothing still, it allowed me to turn the legs over, so that when I started to reintroduce that heavier side of the training, beyond that 2 week off period, it felt like more of a natural progression.
Yeah, I'm glad that you sort of highlighted the trial and error side of things. Like you tried having 2 weeks off, and then the next season tried a little bit more running and see what kind of works for you. Because I think that's probably, if we had like a takeaway message, probably what's going to get down to is like trying a few different things to see how you respond, how you bounce back. And you also said that you're just trying to just see how you feel. And like, I think a lot of runners should make those decisions off how you're feeling. And if you do lose motivation, or if you do like wind up with constantly getting injured, or just feeling really sore, tired legs all the time, maybe it's worth listening to your body, both the physical side of things, but also the mental side of things, and trying to find what's the best pattern for you during that particular time of the year. And yeah, I'm a big fan of just the trial and error and trying to see what naturally fits, and hone in on a bit more of a tailored kind of fit for you and how you're responding.
Yeah, it's funny because when you separate yourself emotionally from what's actually going on, like if I was looking at an athlete's training, I would say, all right, well, running to how you feel might just be something that you navigate, something that you toy with. But we're such regimented creatures. I think at the heart of it, we find it so much easier just ignoring how we feel, looking at the training program and making sure that we tick off every box, because for whatever reason, and I know as I've sort of progressed in my knowledge and sort of ability as a runner, I could see the benefits to someday backing off my training rather than forcing myself through a 90-minute run if I was a little bit under the weather. But there was plenty of years where I was like, all right, it's on the calendar, it's on the schedule, it has to be done. And I remember I started training with Adam Diddick, in the 3 years before I finished up my competitive running career. And one thing that he said to me every time he sent my training through, even during the season, was like, mate, just understand, as much thought and effort that I've put into structuring this towards your goal, these sessions are written in pencil. He goes, that means that they can be rubbed out and adjusted if the way that you're feeling on a particular night or at the start of the session is just evidence that you're not going to be able to get through it effectively. And that really resonated with me. I thought, the idea of it being written in pencil, that I've actually got a little bit of a ability, and if I've got the discipline to and I guess confidence to make some changes to it, it's I don't know, there was something in that left me with a lot of confidence, not only in the fact that he was leaving me open to critique some of the sessions that he might have had down that I didn't think were perfect on that particular night, but also it just allows a little bit of flexibility to how you feel. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or your experience. I can imagine as a physio you would have seen plenty of people who are the kings of just getting through a training routine and not paying too much attention to how they feel.
Yeah, you see a whole bunch of different runners out there. Some do like to ignore what the signs and the signals that their body's telling them. Some people don't even know what it's like to run easy, or to feel good, or to feel like loose. It's because they just like run themselves into the ground. And it's kind of getting them to see the other side, try something new, and see what running should feel like, or how well balanced a training plan should be, before they actually start realizing, I've been doing it all wrong. My legs have been like so tired. I've been like waking up feeling stiff every single day. I just thought that was a part of being a runner, but if you show them the other side, then that could change their mindset. Usually as a physio, I'm seeing injured runners who are trying to either get back to running or get back to pain-free running, or, you know, achieve a greater distance without symptoms flaring up. And so I'm constantly teaching them to listen to their body, and particularly around symptoms during and after a run and the next morning, just to accurately interpret exactly what's going on if they're handling their current running mileage. So once people work with me, and once they listen to the podcast as well, there's tons of lessons around there about how to not only listen to your body, but also how to interpret those sort of signals. But you do get a whole bunch of different runners who are a bit more stubborn, who are a bit more cautious, who, you know, some people you really need to pull the reins back and say you're going way too fast, because as soon as they have a little bit of leeway, as soon as they start feeling a little bit good, they're just going to overdo things. But then you also have the cautious ones who are just, they don't want to flare anything up, and they don't want to exacerbate symptoms. And you actually need to give them a little bit more flexibility and say, hey, you can actually probably handle this. Let's give it a try, and actually, you know, put the carrot out in front of them a little bit more. So everyone's different.
Yeah, it's so interesting as well, because I used to think this was just unique to the distance runners of the world. And then like I've got a history in played a bit of football, AFL football, played some soccer, mainly when I was younger. But I understood from, you know, watching both elements, especially football, that we're all the kings of just going as hard as we possibly can. And I'm not sure if we've spoken about this before, but the idea of taking your foot off the throttle is, for whatever reason, so much more difficult. And the soccer seems the same. It's and I coach a former tennis player now, Matthias, and one of the things that he says to me is like, mate, as a tennis player back in the day, like I would go out for an easy run, and my easy runs would be about my 10K PB pace, because just the idea of taking it easy is almost more foreign to a tennis player than what it is to a distance runner. So it's obviously it's a really hot topic, because whether we're great at you know, navigating our way through an off season, or we're in that category of really struggling, it's obviously a hot topic that a lot of us are trying to navigate. So I guess I'm really keen just to throw it to you, and you can sort of grab my hand and guide me through a number of the off-season tips that you might have. And then perhaps we can have a little bit of a chat around experience and ideas of those particular points, and, you know, hopefully unpack a couple of really helpful practical ways for people to implement it in their own training plan.
Yeah, the first thing I usually think about, which runners don't do, I think in general in life people need to do more of, and that's self-reflect what they have done in, say, the previous season, the previous year, or even the past 5 years. We sort of live in the moment. We kind of live week by week or race by race, and don't have a broader kind of look, or to reflect back and actually say, you know, what went well, what didn't go so well, what did I learn, what can I change for the next season. It doesn't even have to be for seasons, it could be for races. If you planned for a marathon, if you trained throughout that marathon, you executed on that marathon, and then you have that recovery time afterwards, before actually deciding upon what your next goal should be or what your next race should be, ask yourself those 4 questions. Okay, throughout that whole phase, what did go well, what didn't go well, what did I learn, what can I change, is really, really crucial to a lot of like revelations, a lot of insights, and a lot of tweaking your program, or tweaking just your approach in general. Because even just in life, like when I do it a lot less now, but when I first started podcasting and I was, you know, not used to interviewing or editing or asking questions or putting together an episode topic, I would have a guest on, ask some questions, go through it. And then before, like, I'd hit pause, and then I'd think, okay, what went well, what didn't go so well, what did I learn, what can I change? And I believe that the quality of those episodes increased pretty substantially if I was to just fumble my way through it and not really take a chance to self-reflect and have a look back on it. And there was a lot where I actually needed to have some deep thought, and actually went, oh, you know, that actually did go really well. I tried this for the first time and actually worked really well. Like the responses that I got, or, you know, just the quality in general. So reflect back over your past training, reflect back over the previous months, and think, okay, how many times was I injured? how fresh did I feel? How was my outcome goal? Like, how did I perform time wise throughout the marathon? How was my balance? Was it too intense? Was it too low intensity? How was my recovery, diet, sleep? How was my cross training? Like, all of these sort of things you can just ask yourself, and just take the time to ask yourself, because it doesn't really take that long. You probably need to sit down for half an hour and just write a few things out. But then you have this crucial piece of the puzzle that hardly anyone actually does. And you can carry forth to the next season and like boost up your likelihood for success, or to better yourself for the next time round.
Such a great point, man. This is something I find really interesting. I was a fairly avid training diary keeper throughout my running career, and part of that was like the nostalgia of having an old training diary that I could look through, because I had running coaches that would show me their old training diaries, and I was like, man, it's so cool that you showed me stuff from the 80s. And actually, Steve Monaghetti's interview on here was pretty cool, because he was taking out his training diaries from like 1989 and reading
Wow.
through the approach to his 89 marathon in Berlin, which he won. And it was just really cool. So I thought, okay, that's like sexy to me, that that idea of having an old training diary. But on a practical level, as you say, nothing's more helpful than looking through your training in the lead up to, like, for me, my favorite event was the 3,000 meters. And like before I ran 8:10, one of the coolest things was to look back at sort of the 3 months of training leading up to that and go, all right, what was I doing? Like, why was it that this particular night I was able to actually get to the track and, execute the right race plan after setting up a nice foundation? And you're right, man. I don't think a lot of people do take that time to reflect. And it's not unique to running, obviously. Like the last 2 years, I've been really heavily involved in ASX day trading, just on stocks. And I came from nothing. And all the coaches in the trading scene say the same thing. Record yourself when you trade. At the end of the day, go through what worked. Did you panic? Did you get scared? Was there enough? Blah, blah, blah. And same is true in the comedy scene, man. And it's the most brutal feeling to drive home. I did a gig last night in front of mostly comedians and tried new jokes. And to get to the punchline and just hear crickets is so frustrating, so terrifying, so humbling. But also, as you say, it's like the best way to learn. Like, all right, what worked? What didn't? What should I apply? What should I never do again? What a great, it's such a practical thing to say out loud, isn't it? And as you say, it doesn't have to be a really long and laborious process.
Yeah, I'm getting anxious to see you thinking it, or just talking about that whole stand-up comedy scene. I'm just like, oh God, I don't think I could ever do that. So kudos. Yeah,
I
totally
used to
agree.
say the same thing for what it's worth. And maybe I should never have started, because it is terrifying.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's good to do things that scare you sometimes.
Yeah, I do. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. I do love it, but it is terrifying. Sorry, man, I cut you off.
Probably lost my train of thought a little bit, but I do think it's just 4 simple questions, but I also think it's deep thought as well. I think there is some aspect to see beyond like the superficial, to say like, oh, what went well? Yeah, my mileage was good. What didn't go so well? Oh, I got injured. What did I learn? Okay, I learned to maybe see a physio earlier in my injury, get it assessed a bit earlier. What can I change? Well, maybe I'll go to a physio a bit earlier. Like, you can easily just quickly think of things, but I think if you like actually spend some time to do like a couple of layers deeper, you might start to uncover some really nice foundation stuff that you wouldn't have realized if you hadn't really like committed it to like deliberate practice. So yeah, I do think it in a way that it can be a quick process. If you think of reflecting over the past year, it could be quite a quick 30-minute thing, but you do need to sit down and have a really good think about it. But once you practice it enough, you can start to identify things in the moment as well. You can, if I was to reflect back on the last 12 months of running, I probably couldn't remember what happened with a lot of detail. I'd probably think of like general trends. But if it becomes a habit to ask yourself these 4 questions, then, you can look back over the past week, you can look back over the past few days, and then you can really start to get that detail, because we forget things very easily. I can't remember what I had for lunch like 4 days ago, but
Yeah, it's true.
It's a skill, it's a habit, it's a practice. And I think a lot of people need to do it more often in a lot of aspects of their life.
Yeah, really well said, man. That's good. So we've set the foundation. We're off and running. That was number one. What's up next on your list?
I think, well, when you say a list, I've got 5 things here. So I actually do have a list.
I knew you're an organized man.
The second one, like once you've had a look at those 4 questions, is probably just have a look at your current mental state. So if you've just started the off season and you have finished a marathon or a training block, or the peak part of your training, and you're coming into that off season, it's kind of like, well, how much should I still run? What volume should I still run at? Should I take complete time off? I think it's worth just looking at how motivated you currently feel, where mentally and physically you're currently at. We kind of talked about listening to how you feel and sort of making that decision. But then once you've made that decision, kind of trial it and then see if it works or not for you. Maybe trial something different next off season just to see if that works for you. But I do think the mental side of things has a real needs to be analyzed quite deeply, because if you have this burnout that's not really aggressive enough to identify, and then you just carry over into the next season doing more running, that burnout can kind of compound, and so that next off season can be a little bit more less enjoyable, you could say. And then if you were to take some time off in your training during that off season and sort of have time to refresh, mentally kind of unwind and take your mind off running. Every run is different. Like, I love running. I don't necessarily have training peaks or, high volumes, but I could just run all year round. I don't need any accountability or a race to prepare for. I just love getting out and getting some fresh air. So on that side of things, some runners can be highly motivated the entire year because they just love running, but some can get a bit sick of it in phases if they've done a lot of it and they just need some time off. If they do need time off, how much time off, or is it complete time off? So really reflecting on that. And I know there's a few running, like, coaches have different training philosophies on how much volume someone should do in their off season. And that might come into it as well. Depending on how elite they are or what goals they have moving forward. A coach might say, keep a certain running mileage. Some, like ultra running coaches, just like people operating at very high running mileage all year round. And so there are a few different training philosophies around there that would suit runners differently. But if you do find you're getting some burnout, then maybe it's worth that adjustment. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I just like the nuance that's in that, and we sort of touched on it, or I touched on this a little bit in the first point that we were speaking about. Is just taking some time to assess. And you sort of mentioned mindset there a little bit, and the emotional connection sometimes that we have to our running performance. It can be almost like a roller coaster, and during the up times of our running performance, it can be something where we're up and about and we've got the strut in our step and we're excited to be out training. But during those flatter patches, which are inevitable in a sport like running, where our heads drop, where our shoulders are slumped, and it's amazing how quickly our attitude towards running can change based on how it is that we're feeling. And man, one of the best things that I've done in the last couple of weeks was I've just signed up for Sam Harris has a meditation app. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, just called Waking Up.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've heard of it, but I haven't used it.
Dude, they got a 7-day free trial, and I was a little skeptical because traditionally, like, if you had to ask me a year ago what I felt about Sam Harris, I probably was fairly neutral. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, some of his stuff's good, a lot of it I disagree with, and I think that was just off like maybe 1 or 2 YouTube videos that I'd seen. I hadn't really given him a fair chance, but his app it's so well set out, and I was thinking actually the other day so he has like a little overview of a meditation, and then he offers a meditation. And one of the things that he speaks about in it is that the only thing that we ever have with us everywhere is our mindset. And I thought, if we can just learn to navigate our way through the emotional side of running or life in general, like so many things that were sort of up and down on such a regular basis starts to level out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, sure, the highs might not feel as high when you're running really well, but the lows all of a sudden don't upset you as much as what they once would. And just, I feel just having an understanding that that's a natural part of the running world is a really helpful tool.
Exactly. And especially when they're injured as well, then they go through a huge roller coaster of emotions and frustration and self-blame and self-sabotage a lot of times, because they sort of blame themselves for getting injured, or they blame a health professional or a coach for pushing them too hard, or misdiagnosing them initially. It's like a huge roller coaster that I encounter a lot. And so, yeah, the life of a runner, it has its peaks, troughs, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's a really good point, man. It's a really good point. I'm not sure if there's anything else in particular you wanted to say on that. I almost feel as though I'm cheating here and offering you the reins. So when you think we've covered whatever point you have enough, feel free just to carry this conversation straight on through, man.
Yeah, I think the next point that I had written down was more sort of like flows on a lot from that. And it's like kind of making the decision of what training volume you should stick to. So like once you've self-reflected, once you've analyzed kind of your emotional state and what your degree, like your motivation levels or your burnout rate, is then kind of assigning what sort of training volume to maintain or keep, because it's quite hard to rebuild fitness. Like if you've had 6 to 8 weeks off, no running, no cardio whatsoever, it's kind of hard to rebuild that. But it's really easy to maintain that fitness with doing at least a little something. So like if I was at the gym and I was like doing a bench press and I was working really hard, progressing every week and getting to a certain level of strength, if I wanted to maintain that strength, I'd probably only need to do bench press maybe once a week. Even if if we use this analogy of an off season, if I was to do 50% of the bench press that I used to do and just did that once or twice a week, I could probably maintain the bulk of that strength. I could probably get back to that 100% within a couple of weeks because it's really easy to maintain. But I have had extended periods of time where I've gone on holidays, gone traveling, or just had a break from a certain exercise. And then I tried to get back into it. And it is so hard. It takes such a long time to get back to that full to 100%. And I remember I did a 6-month trip like 5 or 6 years ago. And I used to love chin-ups. I used to do rock climbing, indoor rock climbing. And chin-ups was like, because I was really good at it, it was one of my favorite exercises to do. And I was smashing out maybe like 20 per set, and had 6 months off, went traveling, didn't do any gym whatsoever, had a lot of beers, just like out having a good time, came back and I could hardly do 5. And I was so depressed because it was this favorite thing that I love doing, but you have 6 months off. It takes a long time to get back up. But same thing can be said for running volumes. Do you want to have a complete time off? Do you want to do some cross training? It's trying to find how you can sort of reboot a lot of those, the mental state, reboot the body, and commit to some certain level of training volume, some level of running volume, or some cross training alternatives. It can be a nice deliberate decision that you make, and then just listen to the body along the way. Maybe say, oh, I told myself 30 Ks per week, but after the first week or two, maybe it's a bit too much. Let me peg it back a little bit, or, it's worth readjusting. But having that decision, incorporating it in the decision-making process can be really helpful.
Yeah. From a physio perspective, do you have any general guidelines to offer people around figuring out volume? Because that's one question that I get fairly regularly. I would suggest is just navigating, like if someone's brand new to the sport of running and they've set their mind on, like, let's just say it's January now, someone says, okay, I'd like to run the half marathon in Melbourne this year. Like from a physio perspective, are there some certain key factors that we need to look out for to make sure that volume isn't increasing too quickly? Obviously little sore points, tender points and things like that. But as we've established, people are very good at just going, all right, I need to do more and do it quicker than actually just gradually building up to something.
The hard part is finding a starting point for a lot of people. And you kind of have to underdo it to start with to be a bit conservative. But if someone in your example said, I haven't ran before, but I want to do a marathon in 10 months time, where should I start? What's my starting volume? There's no like research or data to kind of point to numbers, but just off your general feel, usually go off their past history with certain activities or their strength, and just get a gauge of what you think they can tolerate. And it's a guessing game, but it's trying to get as much data points as you can to reach like a decision that kind of sounds like you've got justification behind it. And so for an example, someone might be a new parent and they haven't ran for, 5 years, they haven't done really any sort of exercise fitness for 5 years, and they've put on some weight, and then they say, okay, my kids are a little bit older now, I want to start focusing on myself, let me start running. You'll be starting really gradually, like a couch to 5K style, like a lot of walking, little bit of jogging, readjusting after a couple of weeks based on how the body feels, because they're pretty much based on zero. Whereas when I started running, never a long distance runner. I was in my early 20s, but I had a pretty substantial background playing basketball. So good level of fitness, somewhat strong in the gym, doing gym a couple of times a week. So had an aerobic and strength kind of foundation, but just didn't know how to do long distance at a slow, steady pace for a long period of time. And so I could probably be a lot more easier with assigning a higher volume to start with. And then once you've found a starting point, once there's a bit more substance behind it, then there are some general guidelines, some general volumes. Most people hear the 10% rule of mileage and building upon 10%, but it's extremely conservative for someone who is already operating at a really low mileage. You wouldn't do 10%. It just take way too long to ramp things up. And so it does depend on the runner. If someone is doing 20 to 30 Ks per week, then you might want to do somewhere between 10 and 15%, sometimes 15 to 20 if they're for a certain period of time, if they're negotiating it quite well. If they're starting to get a bit sore or lacking a little bit of recovery, or maybe some injuries are popping up here and there, or if someone has a long history of running related injuries, then you might need to peg it back to 5 to 10%. If someone's had 3 different running related injuries in the past 6 months, then you want to be really conservative with them, because through the research, we know the more running related injuries you've had in the past, no matter what they are, increases your likelihood of another running related injury in the future. So the more you have, the more conservative you should be, and the more cautious you should be with increasing your running mileage. And so, yeah, there are a few guidelines that we can follow. Sometimes I like to have 10 to 15%. If someone's at a really low, starting off with a really low base, we can up it to 15 to 20% for the first couple of weeks. But the other conversation to be had is, like, if you just purely go off running mileage, we're not factoring in intensity. And someone could increase by 10% per week. They could go from, running 30 Ks per week to 33 Ks per week, but they have upped their intensity substantially, and they get this overuse injury because a lot of their 30 Ks was really easy mileage, but this new 33 Ks incorporates a lot of sprint work, or hill repeats, or just like time trials or efforts, and they get an overuse injury and they say, what the hell? I thought 10% was conservative. And you just delve into the intensity side of things and find that there was a huge abrupt change in their training, and that's why they're injured. And so there are a few ways around factoring in intensity, which I can go into, but I don't know where you want this conversation to go.
Oh no, just to sort of put an asterisk next to what you've just said there. What I love about what you've said is, it's just such an individualized sport. And as much as, you can jump onto Google and find a generic training program to run your first half marathon. From my perspective, whenever someone contacts me looking for coaching or looking for a training program, most of the time, like, I've got access to generic training programs, or there's that at the Relax Running website, but I'm far more careful or far more focused on working with people one-on-one for that exact reason. It's just having that open line of communication to go, all right, like, we've made a couple of changes in your training schedule this week. Sure, we've added the volume, but we might have slightly reduced the intensity, and just toying with that. I think that room for growth is so much easier to develop when you've actually got that open communication stream going back and forth. So like anyone out there who's sort of just getting stuck or bumping their heads on generic training programs, I reckon that's something to consider, even if it's, it doesn't have to be me or Brodie as such, but even if you can contact someone who's got a little more running experience than you to just help structure, help guide the way towards your goal. Because as you say, there's quite a few moving variables that if you move them all at once, it can pretty quickly lead you down a road of injury and just even fatigue.
Yeah, assigning like a distance, assigning like a particular focus for a session, assigning a certain intensity for that session is really nice. You don't see too many running programs that incorporate all of those. Sometimes it's just like that really generic, 5Ks today, 7Ks on the weekend, and like it's sometimes that simple.
Mm.
But yeah, it does require tailored um, some tailored modifications, because we know that unexpected things do happen. We know throughout an entire marathon, if you were to follow that regimented build up, if you get injured 3/4 of the way through, then that throws a huge wrench into the training program, and you're stuck with what to do. Like if you got injured and you had to take a week off, just as a very minimalist style of injury, if you had to take 7 days off, well, where do you restart? Do you start
Mm.
back at where you were injured? Do you pretend like that injury didn't happen and start a week ahead? Or do you just try and have an aggressive kind of ramp catch up sort of approach? Like you're just left really stuck. And so that's where the modifications do come in. You do have a coach that says, okay, we're back to running. These are the modifications we need to make. This is how we can still keep running, still monitor symptoms. We're going to take a couple of Ks off your long run. We're going to remove this high intensity hill repeat, and we're going to replace it with a slow, easy something. And then we'll just like build up from there. It's like unexpected things happen. Very rarely does everything go according to plan throughout a marathon training schedule. So yeah, it does require those modifications.
Really good point, man. Well said. All right, we've got 2 more points to get through. I'm keen to hear what number 4 is. So, as I said, you pave the way.
Um, we talked about like just be careful when you return back to training. Like during the off season, if you do have significant time off, and you do get back in, it's like off season's done. Let me get back into my running, just making sure that things aren't too abrupt. But the fourth one I have is the chance to work on any of your weak links. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people have their weak links in their running, and a lot of it, I know a lot of runners who think they're quite well rounded, but they lack in, say, speed work, or they lack in strengthening, or they lack in maybe mobility or their recovery, or certain aspects that they don't spend a lot of time on when they're in that peak. They don't really have time while they're in that peak phase of their training to learn how to deadlift or learn how to ramp up or change up their strength programs or their cross training. So off season is the perfect time to develop into a more well-rounded, more resilient type of runner, because we do want that running resiliency. It might be, I've got like my usual go-tos are strength and conditioning. If there's any weak links in your strength and conditioning, now's a great time to start building upon that. If you don't have any cross-training alternatives, if you're one to run 6 days per week, 5 or 6 days per week, and you don't have any cross-training alternatives, and you have been injured multiple times in the past year, it's probably good to find a cross-training alternative to help shift the loads of your body, because most running related injuries are overuse. You're using the same muscle the same way, the same time over and over and over again until it eventually reaches its capacity. But cross training, if it's cycling or if it's on a rower or if it's the elliptical machine, all of these help your cardiovascular system, but shift the loads, shift the demands of the body in different ways. So it reduces your risk of overuse injuries. But a lot of runners just want to run. They don't want to do cross training stuff because they don't want to try it out and suck at it. They want to do what they're good at. And so they're deterred from trying these new things. But off-season training, the off season might be a really good opportunity to venture out and try a few of these different cross training alternatives. And maybe if you persist for a couple of weeks, you might find one that you like. Other ones is maybe a change in shoes. If you want to like try to go towards like a minimalist shoe or try some different types of property style shoes, we know that that takes a transition needs to be quite gradual, which you might not have time for in peak training, and maybe just speed work or hill repeats or plyo kind of training, like all these sort of things that are developed to make you a well-rounded, resilient runner. you now have time for, and then you can slowly build that into your next season, training for next season, and you become a more resilient runner. That's the goal that we all have. And so now's a perfect time to do it.
That's good, man. Yeah, I like that idea at the end of the season, just being like a bit more of a clean slate, just to try these things out, because it can be overwhelming when your schedule's already full of training ideas to go, all right, I'm going to try and add this on top of everything else as well.
Yep.
No, beautifully
Absolutely.
said, man. I haven't got much to offer at the end of that apart from an exclamation point. So really, really nicely done, man. And we round us out. Point number 5.
Yeah. Point number 5 is just pretty much just assigning or setting yourself some goals for the next season. So we've reflected on the season before. It's time to assign something for the next season, because we know that you achieve better outcomes when you set some goals. And it might not necessarily be an outcome goal. It might not necessarily be a marathon in under 4 hours. It might be something along getting better sleep, better nutrition, working on mobility, working on the strength training, all these sort of goals that they might be process goals rather than those outcome goals. But if you put them down on paper, you commit to them, you're increasing your likelihood for success rather than just having a really vague plan, crossing your fingers and seeing how it goes and just hoping for the best. We know that the better outcomes, the likelihood of success increases when you start writing things down and committing to something.
Yeah, so much easier to hit a target when you know what it is you're aiming for. It's a
right.
great point. I don't know what you're like at the end of the season. I'm a big goal setter. Like for me, I thoroughly enjoy sitting down, not just with the categories expanded a little for me now, because when I was running, obviously I had a section of goals dedicated just to my running, whereas now running fits into more of like a health and fitness routine. So it's a part of a bigger kind of spectrum. But for me, I like my favorite thing, I did it just a few weeks ago, is to go to a cafe for a few hours and just to flirt with a couple of little ideas about what it is I'm going to try and achieve next year. And as you say, like a lot of them are, they sort of, what do you say? What's the right word? They sort of transform a little bit as I go sometimes. Like I'll start out with a particular goal and sometimes I'll be a little conservative. And even that, like even just having a goalpost that you pass quite early, I find great, because it's great for your confidence. Like, and some of the goals I don't even realize are conservative at the time, but I'll sit down and go, all right, well, like X will really, really good target. And then all of a sudden by mid-February, you've hit that. I go, hang on a second, I've got a little bit of swagger going on here. And it's really nice headspace to take into the rest of the year. So that's a really good way to finish out, man. It's a great closing point. Have you done much of the goal setting stuff in your own life? I picked you as a bit of a goal setter, to be honest.
Well, when it comes to health and fitness, I'm more of a reflector. Like, definitely around health, I'm like, okay, how can I better this? How can I better this area? How can I get better at sleep? How can I get better at nutrition? It's not like a goal of let me sleep for 9 hours a night. It's more of a what has happened in the past has disrupted my sleep, and how can I change it to get better sleep in the future? So it's more of a reflecting. But on the business side of things, I'm very much goal setting, very much like an ideas man. This is where I sort of see myself in certain periods of time and dedicating to that. So health and fitness, more of a reflector and modifying things here and there, just to trying to get a little bit better each time. But definitely the business side of things, the podcast side of things, I'm more of that analytical. Let's have these growth kind of goals and assign myself that. So yeah, it's interesting that I've had those two approaches for those particular aspects of life, but I've found it particularly useful.
Awesome, man. And for those listeners who are brand new to the show, I think this is your third time on here. So I reckon like the core crew in the relaxed running world knows all about you. But for anyone else who might not know too much about you, where do they, obviously the Run Smarter podcast, have you got a website? Do you have an app up and running?
I do. I have a few things going on, but the podcast is always the first avenue or the first medium that I want people to kind of check out, because I'm really passionate about people learning themselves and kind of building on their own running IQ. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, the first 10 episodes of the Run Smarter podcast contain 10 universal principles to reduce your risk of injury. And that's usually what grips people, what people like about that, and gets them continuing on to more episodes. And there's 200 and 200 plus episodes on there at the moment. But if they do like that style, if they do see the benefits and they start like implementing things in their running, they can usually go the next step. I do have the app that houses my blogs, houses some videos, and houses my episodes. They're all in neat kind of categories. And I also have like a free injury chat if people are interested in that. It's just free 20 minutes if you need to talk about Achilles tendinopathy or an injury that you're really struggling to overcome. I usually have a lot of my podcast listeners booking in for those. And if they need to discuss, or if they want to find out if they're suitable for online physio or in-person physio, then that's a good time to do so as well.
Awesome, man. No, that sounds great. Well, dude, always good to catch up with you. Thanks again for stopping by. It's good to see you moving and shaking in the world of running. So as always, mate, open invitation for you on here anytime if you've got something new to say or share.
Always good to catch up, mate. Thanks for having me on.